All right, 1 o'clock. We'll get started with our Aesop study for the week. Everybody give me a wave if you can hear me okay. Give me a wave. Good, good, good. All right, thank you. So audio is working okay. Today is Monday, February 13th. We're going to be working on lesson number 83 in Aesop's Fables. It's the fable of the goat herd and the goats. It's a pretty simple one, so I think we're actually going to do more than one, probably do 2 fables today. Just give a few minutes for everyone to settle in here. Okay, so fable number 83. I'll share my screen so we have a text to look at together. I'll zoom in on this for us here. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So as I said, today we're going to look at fable. This is lesson 83, the goat herd and the goats. And what I recommend you do, I recommend that you pay attention as we go through the lesson and participate as much as you'd like to. You don't have to participate if you just want to sit there and listen, that's fine. But after the class is over, while the lesson is fresh in your mind, you should go and complete this fable lesson. It's probably the easiest way to get these fable lessons done. So pay attention, ask any questions. There'll be time at the end for questions too. So if you have a question, you might want to just wait till the end, and then I'll hang out as long as you need to for questions. And then after the class, go and finish these lessons on the Aesop's Fables course, because I think that's the easiest way to do it. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I think just about everybody has settled in. So this is the fable of the goat herd and the goats. The goat herd is a person who takes care of the goats. Just so you know, before we get into this, a goat herd doesn't necessarily own the goats. He's not necessarily the owner. He could be a servant who just takes care of them. That's his job. He takes care of the goats for the master. So the fable of the goat herd and the goats. Would anybody like to read this week? Anyone interested in being the reader? Let's see here. I think Jude, you've read before. Let's let Gianna Bolig, you can be our reader today. Let me find you on here and I'll open up your microphone. Just a minute. All right, Gianna, go ahead and just read nice and clear and slow for us the fable of the goat herd and the goats. Go ahead.
During a snowstorm in the depth of winter, a goat herd drove his goats for shelter to a large caravan in a rock. It happened that some wild goats had already taken refuge there. The man was so struck by the size and look of these goats, and with their superior beauty to his own, that he gave them alone all the food he could collect. The storm lasted many days, and the tame goats, being entirely without food, died of starvation. As soon as the sun shone again, the strangers ran off and made the best of their way to their native wilds. The goatherd had to go goatless home, and was well laughed at by all for his folly.
All right, thank you very much. So we have this fable of the goat herd and the goat. So let's go through the details. Remember, if you want to jot anything down, it might be a good idea to have a piece of paper handy. And then after we're done, I'll make sure we cover all of the content of the assessment questions, so you can go and complete that lesson and easily make your way through the Fables course. So this is the fable of the goat herd and the goats. And remember, we have to pay attention to all of the details. So when did this take place? During a snowstorm in the depth of winter, right? During a snowstorm in the depth of winter, we read. During a snowstorm in the depth of winter, a goat herd who, and just so you understand, most of you probably don't have goats, so you don't know what a goat herd does. He's got to take his goats out into the fields, usually among hills and things like that, and he leads them to places where there's grass or bushes and things like that for the goats to eat. And he'll lead them out in the morning, help them to find some food, keep an eye on them, make sure they're safe, keep them all together so they don't scatter and run around. And then after they've eaten for a while, he'll lead them to a place where there's some water. And then after they've drunk, he'll lead them back for the day to a shady, quiet area where they're safe and they can relax. And then he'll usually do the same thing again in the evening. And that's the goat herd's job, to take the goats out, let them graze, lead them to places where there's food, and then bring them back to safety after they've all eaten and drunk for the day. So as he's leading them out, it's winter time, so you can imagine all of the plants are dead. There's not much around, so they've got to walk around greater distances to try to find things to eat. And as they're going around, all of a sudden, a snowstorm comes upon them, and they're stuck out in the snowstorm. So the goat herd has to find a place to get the goats to safety, and he finds a cave, a large cavern in a rock. He finds a cave where he can lead these goats, and he brings the goats to this cave to get out of this snowstorm. And then once he gets the goats in the cave, he would probably find a way to block the entrance to the cave, so the goats are trapped inside and safe. And then he would go out and he would collect food for the goats and bring it back into the cave for them during the snowstorm, like a shepherd, yeah. Okay? So that's what's going on here. He brings these goats to this cave, leads them all into the cave, but then he finds something surprising when he gets to this cave. What does he find in the cave? What does he find in the cave when he gets his goats in there? What does he find? More goats. And what kind of goats? Yeah, not just any goats. What kind of goats are they? What kind of goats? They're wild goats, okay? So these are goats that are not kept by anybody else. They live out in the wild. They live in the mountains or in the hills. They're wild goats, not tame. So he leads his goats into this cave, and when he gets them all settled in there, he finds out that there's a whole nother bunch of goats, wild goats, in this cave already out of the bad weather. When he sees these goats, we read that he is struck by the size and look of these goats. In other words, these wild goats are big and beautiful. And so he sees these big, beautiful wild goats, and he's amazed. He's struck by how big and beautiful they are. And so what he does is he desires to try and take care of them or please them. Maybe because he's thinking he might try to keep them in some way. That's probably what he's thinking. Here are his goats, they're smaller, they're not as beautiful. Here's this pack of wild goats, they're big and they're beautiful. And he probably thinks, you know what, I have an opportunity to keep these goats for myself. So he tries to please them and he feeds them. It says he was struck by the size and the look of these goats, with their superior beauty to his own. I wouldn't say that he's scared, Damien. I see you wrote there that maybe he's scared. I don't think he's scared because he's struck. It says he's struck by their beauty, right? It doesn't tell us that he's afraid of them. It tells us that he thinks they're beautiful. And so he decides to give them all the food that he can collect. I think that he's thinking that maybe he can keep them. And while he's giving the food that he collects to these wild goats, he neglects the goats that he brought in with him, his own tame goats, because they're smaller and they're not as pretty as the wild goats. So he gives all the food to these wild goats, these bigger, beautiful wild goats, and he ignores his own tame goats. And so it says, the storm lasted many days. The tame goats, being entirely without food, died of starvation. So he neglected his own goats and they died. As soon as the sun shone again, when the weather changed and the storm went away, the sun came out, the strangers, the wild goats, ran off and made the best of their way to their native wilds. They went back where they came from. And the goatherd had to go goatless home. All of his goats had died of starvation, and he was well laughed at by all for his folly. Okay, he was well laughed at by all for his folly. So again, notice that we're told by Aesop that the goatherd is foolish. Okay, so that's the fable of the goatherd and the goats. Now, let's think about these wild goats. Let's think about these characters. All right, the wild goats, who takes care of wild goats? Who takes care of the wild goats? No one. Good. No one takes care of wild goats. They're created, usually, and again, I don't know if any of you have experience on a farm, but there are different breeds of animals. Some of them are wild by nature, some of them are tame. A good way to think about it is to compare dogs and coyotes or wolves. Wolves and coyotes look like dogs. We could maybe even put foxes in with coyotes and wolves. They look like dogs, but you can't bring a wolf home, even if it's a puppy. You can't raise a wolf and keep it because it's wild by nature. Coyotes and foxes, they're wild by nature. You can play with them maybe when they're puppies, when they're babies, but they eventually grow up and they have a nature that's wild. And so you can't keep wild goats. They're wild by nature. Let's stop chatting and listen. Pay attention. You can't keep wild goats because they're wild by nature. Many people think that they can because we're struck by their beauty. I don't know if you've ever seen a fox, for example, but foxes are beautiful animals. And when you see a fox, you might think, man, I really wish I could have a fox. They're so beautiful. You might think the same if you saw a wolf. You might think, oh, they're beautiful animals. Some people try to keep tigers and even lions because they're so beautiful. They're big and beautiful animals. But by their nature, they're wild animals. And so they can't be kept. They can't be kept. They can't be tamed. They weren't created by God to be tamed. God created certain species for men to keep, and he created other species to be wild. And usually the wild species are bigger and more beautiful than the tame species. And so men are sort of tempted to desire the wilder species. That's why we go to the zoos. We go to the zoo because we want to see all these wild animals. We're not interested in our dogs and cats at home. We're not interested in our parakeets and hamsters that we keep at home. We want to see a lion or a gorilla or a bear. That's what we're really interested in. We want to see some anaconda snake from the Amazon. We're interested in wild animals because they're usually bigger and more beautiful. And there are some people who try to keep them, who try to actually buy them and keep them as pets. But what happens is we have to understand that they have a nature that's wild. They're not going to be tamed. And our desire for them is a foolish desire for them. And we're simply not being content with the things that God intended for us to have. The species that God actually gave to us and made for us that we can tame and keep safely for our own benefit. So this goatherd acts foolishly. And here's the moral of this fable, so pay attention here. What's foolish about the goatherd is that he has desires that are contrary to nature. That's what's foolish about the goatherd. The goatherd's desire is contrary to nature. He should know better. He should know that he can't keep these wild goats. But his desires are unnatural, and he makes a decision to sacrifice his tame goats, which are actually his, to try and please and keep the wild goats, which are bigger and more beautiful, but they're wild. And so his desire is foolish. He chooses to go after the wild goat, to act contrary to nature. And as soon as the weather changes and the sun comes back out, the wild goats take off. The wild goats take off and go back where they're from. After all, they don't need a goat herd. they're big and beautiful living by themselves. And the way that God creates animals, he usually creates wild animals to be healthier, just like weeds. If you think about weeds in gardens, the weeds in the garden usually live by themselves. They don't need to be watered or taken care of. You don't fertilize for weeds. The weeds grow in the middle of a sidewalk. They grow through cracks in the street. The weeds are usually hardier and more healthy by themselves. And the tame species, the plants that we actually want to cultivate, they need human care in order to survive and do well. So we often admire the wild animals and we get frustrated with the tame animals because they need more care. And that's what happens to this goat herd. So his desire is contrary to nature. He decides to try to take hold of the wild animals. He gives them the food that he collects. He doesn't give that food to his own goats, and so his own goats die. And then as soon as the weather changes, the wild goats aren't thankful. They don't care that he fed them. They don't have the disposition of tame animals. And so as soon as the weather changes, they take off and go back to their wild places. And he's left with his goats, the tame goats, but they're all dead because he didn't feed them. And so he has to go back home, go back to his village or wherever he's from, and he goes with no goats, and he's laughed at for his foolishness. And again, his foolishness is desiring things that are contrary to nature. Okay. It's like if some of you, I know some of you live up north in, let's say, I know Connecticut, maybe Pennsylvania. It's like if you desire to try to grow an orange tree and you let all of your apple trees and all of your other plants and fruit bushes and things, you let them all die and you invested everything you had in growing orange trees. It's a desire that's contrary to nature. You can't do it. And some people can say, well, you can build a greenhouse and you can do this and you can do that. But when you try to work contrary to nature, usually it doesn't succeed. And so what we normally do is we try to grow things that grow well in our area, even though they may need a little bit of help, a little bit of work. We try to grow things that are suited for our area, which are relatively tame. And the same is true for animals, okay? When people think about buying dogs, for example, they often look at pictures of dogs and they think that they're going to pick a dog because they like the way it looks. But the different dogs, different breeds of dogs, they have certain characters and qualities that are built into them by creation. And they don't necessarily want to be your little household puppy. You can go buy a shepherd dog, for example, and that dog was created to run across hundreds of acres of land. It may be very difficult for you to keep that dog in your backyard. So we have to learn to have desires that are in agreement with nature. This goat herd desires things that are not natural, and he suffers the consequence. He loses what's his, trying to get something that's not his. So that's the fable of the goat herd and the goats. So the next question is, how can we apply this to our own lives? Stop with the chat and pay attention. How can we apply this to our own lives? Well, it teaches us that we have to look at our circumstances, look at who we are, understand who we are, what we are, and desire things that appear to be God's will for us, things that are natural for us and good for us. We can't necessarily desire things that other people have because other people may have different circumstances. That's why we're taught in the 10 Commandments to not covet other people's possessions. Just because other people have things doesn't mean that you can have those same things. And so we shouldn't look at what other people have. We shouldn't look at things that are outside of our reach, outside of our control, but we should be content with the things that God's given us. Because if we try to grab at things that are beyond us, if we try to go for things that are too far above us because we're prideful or we're covetous, we can end up losing the things that were given to us, things that are actually ours to have. So that's the danger of coveting things that are beyond our reach, which is what this goat herd does here in this fable of the goat herd and the goat. So that's the fable of the goat herd and the goats, as I said, it's a pretty easy one. Make sure you rightly identify the moral of the fable, which is not to desire things contrary to nature. And then think of a good application for your own life, where maybe you have made the same mistake that the goat herd made and set your desires on something that you can't have, and then you were frustrated when you maybe lost something else. Okay, a good application might be with friends. There may be certain kids that it seems that God has given you certain opportunities for friendships or relationships that are within your own circle, within your own family circle, or church community, things like that. God's provided you with opportunities for friends, but you desire some other group, and this is sort of a group that's outside of your group, and you may actually lose the friends that you could have had trying to get friends that you really had no chance of ever having. So you can think about lots of other examples like that, of how you can fall into the error of this goat herd. All right, so that's the fable of the goat herd and the goats. That's that one. Let's move on to this next one. This is another easy one, I think, and I think we've already seen this story before, but it's a little bit different. Would anyone like to read this fable of the dove and the ant? Let's try to find somebody different. Let's see. Rachel Mushter, I'll let you read this one. Let me find Rachel on here. Just a minute. Let me find Rachel. There she is. Okay, Rachel, I think your microphone's open. So why don't you go ahead and read for us? Just take your time, nice and slow. The dove and the ant. Go ahead.
An ant going to a river to drink fell in and was carried along in the stream. A dove pitied her condition and threw into the river a small bow, by means of which the ant gained the shore. The ant afterwards, seeing a man with a fowling piece aiming at the dove, stung him in the foot sharply and made him miss his aim, and so saved the dove's life.
Very good. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so we have the fable of the dove and the ant. So we have an ant here, and before we get into this fable, depending on where you live, ants can be different. When I was a kid, I grew up in New Jersey, and we had little black ants that never really bothered us. They just, we would see them around places and things like that, but they never bothered us. We moved to North Carolina down south, and down south here we have red ants, and these red ants actually bite and sting. They're nasty things. If you step on one of their ant hives, they'll swarm you and attack and bite, and they can even inject you with a poison that's called formic acid. So there's different kinds of ants, and when we read this story, we have to realize that it says that the ant stung him in the foot sharply, and some of you may never have been around ants that sting. So just understand that there are certain kinds of ants that bite and sting people, and they're very nasty. So let's look at this fable. An ant, one of these ants, going to a river to drink, fell into the river, and he was carried along in the stream. And so we know eventually he's probably going to die. So he gets stuck in this stream, and he's going downstream on this river, when a dove sees this ant, pities her condition, has pity on the ant, and throws into the river. The word is a small bough. It's pronounced bough, a little branch. He drops a branch into the river so the ant can grab onto it and get up out from the water. So he drops a branch or a stick into the river to the ant, and the ant climbs up onto this stick and uses it like a boat, and eventually gets over to the shore and is safe. The ant afterwards, seeing a man with a fowling piece. What do you think a fowling piece is? What do you think a fowling piece is? Gun, an arrow. Yeah, I don't think that what exactly it is matters that much. We understand the idea, right? He's got a weapon that he plans to use to kill this bird. All right, good. We don't. I'm not going to say what it necessarily is, but we understand the point, right? He sees a man aiming a weapon at the dove to kill the dove, and he stings him in the foot, makes him miss the dove with his shot, and saves the dove's life. Okay, so we've seen this kind of story before, right? Where, think of the lion and the mouse, when the lion had a chance to kill the mouse, lets the mouse live, and then the mouse chews through the net that the lion was caught in. It's a fable similar to that one, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. First of all, do you think that doves, answer this question, do you think that doves like ants? Do you think that this dove has any kind of friendship or relationship to these ants? No. If the dove landed on an ant hill, the ants would probably sting the dove just like they would sting this man. So the dove doesn't have any relationship. They're not friends or anything like that. The dove simply sees this ant in a bad situation and decides to have mercy. And so we have this word pity. And the moral of this fable has to do with this virtue of pity. Can you think of a story that you've read or a movie or anything you've seen where one of the themes of the story was pity? Anyone who had pity on another character? Can you think of an example of pity? I'll give you a minute to think of something. Yeah, Max Hazelbarth. I don't know Jurassic Park, so I can't talk about that. Gollum and Frodo. That's very good. Okay, so let's talk about Gollum and Frodo, because in Lord of the Rings, they explicitly talk about how Frodo has pity on Gollum. Remember what Sam wants to do to Gollum. What does Sam want to do to Gollum in Lord of the Rings? What does Sam want to do to Gollum? He wants to kill him, get rid of him, right? So Sam doesn't trust Gollum. He doesn't care about Gollum's story. He just believes that Gollum is not trustworthy, and so he wants to beat him up all the time or chase him away, even kill him. And Frodo will never let Sam kill him. Frodo always protects Gollum, and he actually says, in the movie at least, he says, I have pity upon him. I pity him. Okay, so we see pity in that story of Lord of the Rings. And here we see this dove pities the condition of the ant. And the reason why we feel pity for someone is because we understand their weakness. Okay, we understand their weakness. So this dove, think about a dove. Is a dove a predator? Does a dove kill other animals? What kind of an animal is a dove? What kind of an animal is a dove? It's a bird. Yeah, what kind of bird? I mean, birds could be like eagles and hawks, right? It's a calm bird. It's a gentle bird, okay? A dove is innocent and gentle. It's harmless, can't harm anything. And so the dove, look at the dove's life. The dove spends its life being hunted by men. And so the dove, being this gentle, innocent bird, spends its life trying to avoid being trapped or killed by men. And so the dove knows what it feels like to be weak and in danger. And so when the dove sees this ant in a bad situation, the dove pities the ant, feels sorry for the ant. And that's why Frodo pitied Gollum, because what caused Gollum to be the way that he was? Why was Gollum bad? What happened to Gollum? Can anybody answer that question? The ring, right? The ring caused Gollum to be bad, right? The ring corrupted him and made him miserable. So, and Frodo had to carry the ring, and Frodo felt the ring doing the same thing to him that it did to Gollum. So Frodo felt like it really wasn't Gollum's fault that he was bad. It was the ring's fault, where Sam never carried the ring. So Sam didn't feel that pity that Frodo felt for Gollum. So the dove knows what it feels like to be weak and in danger, and he pities the ant, or she pities the ant, and drops the ant a bough to help the ant get out of the water. And then the ant luckily does get out of the water, get back to the shore. And then the dove, in a time of its own danger, being hunted by a stronger predator, a man with a weapon even, is in trouble. And the ant, remembering the pity of the dove and how the dove saved its life, chooses to sting the man in the foot and makes the man miss the dove. What do you think happened to the ant when he stung the man's foot? What do you think happened to the ant when he stung the man's foot? If an ant bites me on the foot, I smack it and kill it, right? You stomp it and kill it. Good. So this ant, in order to save the dove, ended up risking and sacrificing his own life. So the ant was probably killed and helps to save the dove. And the reason why he saves the dove was because the dove showed pity on him. And so this fable, The Dove and the Ant, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than the lion and the mouse, because the lion and the mouse, the lion could have just killed the mouse, but we don't see the dove, we don't have a situation where the dove can kill the ant. It's different, right? The dove could have just ignored the ant and just flew by and went on his own business. The dove saw the ant and chose to go out of his way to help the ant, and so was kind and merciful to the ant. And then the ant, being moved by gratitude for the pity of the dove, offers his own life to save the dove from this hunter. So that's the fable of the dove and the ant. As for the characters, doves are harmless. That's what the word innocent means. The word innocent, what it means is harmless, okay? Yeah, pity means to be merciful, all right? But I want you to understand the character of a dove is the innocent character. It means harmless. That's what that word means. The dove pities the ant. The ant is an animal that nobody really likes. No one likes ants. No one keeps ants, or no one sees an ant and says, "Oh, look, an ant," and go pick up an ant and play with. Nobody does that, right? We usually kill ants. Ants are like mosquitoes. They're sort of pesty little creatures that the only relationship we usually have with them is we kill them. So the dove is not only pitiful, but pitiful to an annoying creature that is usually just killed by other people. So we have these two characters. The dove shows pity to a creature that's not lovable. Okay, it's not a lovable thing. And the dove teaches us that we should show pity because we never understand how pity might be repaid in the future. So that's the moral of the dove and the ant: to be merciful, to show pity, to remember pity, because you never know when you'll have a time of need, and you're going to rely on the pity of others yourself. Now let's think about an application for this real quick. I want you to think about the Lord's Prayer. You should all know the Lord's Prayer, and there's one line in the Lord's Prayer where we ask God, we say, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." We forgive those who trespass against us, right? We ask God to forgive our sins, but there's a condition that God promises to forgive our sins. God promises to forgive our sins if we forgive the sins of other people. So when we pray and ask God to forgive our sins, we say, what we're really saying is, forgive me in the same way that I have forgiven others. So if we're pitiful towards others, if we're merciful towards others, that gives us the opportunity to ask God to be merciful to us. But if we're cruel and hard with other people, then if we're cruel and hard with other people, then it makes no sense for us to ask God to be merciful and kind to us, because God's going to treat us the way that we've treated others. Okay, so that's taught to us in the Lord's Prayer. So this message of being merciful so that you may receive mercy yourself, that's a lesson that's taught to us by God himself. Our salvation depends upon whether or not we're merciful to others, okay? Just like Frodo with Gollum. All right, So that's the fable of the dove and the ant. So we've covered 2 fables in this class meeting, and we still have lots of time. So what I recommend you do is, when we wrap up this class, go and get these 2 fables done, finish the assignments, and submit them, so you can get credit for both of those while you continue to work on whatever fable you're already working on in the class. All right, so that's that. Any questions? We have plenty of time here. We've got 20 minutes or so. We've already got 2 fables taken care of. Any questions? If you don't have any questions, you're free to go today. If you do have any questions, or if you'd like me to look at another fable, we can take some time to look at another fable. No, your pictures will not be on YouTube. The only people who will be on the video of the recorded lesson are those who read. So if you're in the class here, you won't be on video, only if you read. That's why I try to pick only the good-looking people to be the readers, you know? That's how I pick. All right, so Xavier Ozevec asks, can we do the cock and the jewel next? Sure. I know this one off the top of my head, so let's just talk about it, all right? The fable of the cock and the jewel, you have a cock, and you have to understand what that is. It's a rooster, and I don't know if any of you keep chickens at your house, and if you do keep chickens, whether you keep a rooster or not, but roosters are, you know, we use the adjective in English, cocky. We say, oh, he's a cocky kid, and what that means is he's kind of arrogant, likes to start trouble, thinks he's a tough guy, and things like that. So listen up. We're going to talk about the cock and the jewel. Let's stop with the chat. So the cock and the jewel, we've got this young punk, this cock, this young rooster who is trying to, it says he's trying to impress the hens. He's trying to impress the hens. Give me 1 second. I'm going to quiet this chat room down here the easy way. Just a second. Okay. The cock wants to impress these hens, and so he's poking around in the chicken yard looking for something to impress these hens with. And he finds, what does he find? Who can tell me what the cock finds? He finds a jewel, right? And what does he do with the jewel? Is he impressed by the jewel? No, he's not impressed by the jewel. What's he looking for? What's he looking for? He's looking for some corn or some seeds. Yeah, he's looking for chicken food, right? That's what he's looking for. So he finds this jewel and he says, I have no interest in this jewel. So he throws it out of the way. And that's really the story of the cock and the jewel. He has no interest in the jewel, throws it aside, and he says, I would rather have 1 grain of corn or one wheat berry than to have, you know, all the jewels in the world. And so that's the fable. What's the moral of that fable? What's the moral of the fable of the cock and the jewel? I know that many of you have studied that already. What's the moral of the fable of the cock and the jewel? Someone take a shot. To think and ask for help before doing something. That's good. That's good. So he finds something. Let me respond to what Xavier wrote, because that's good. To ask for help. What happens is he finds something and he doesn't understand what it is. And so he just, because he's cocky, because he's arrogant, he just assumes that if he doesn't understand it, it must be useless. So he throws it away. And it teaches us that when we find something or do something and we don't understand what's going on, that we should ask for help and not just always trust in our own understanding. There's a proverb, Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 says, do not lean upon your own understanding, but trust in the Lord. Do not lean upon your own understanding. And when we come to something we don't understand, something we've never seen before, we should ask for help. Okay, so that's the moral of the fable of the cock and the jewel. And how we can apply that to our life is pretty simple, right? assume that people who are older than us, who have experience that we don't have, assume that they already know how to do things that we've never done before. So rather than quit, if you face something that's difficult or something that's new, usually kids will fuss about it and quit, whereas what you should do is ask for help. And someone who has experience is willing to help. That's why it's good to have a tutor. It's why it's good to work with other students who are older and more experienced than you, and to offer to help kids who are younger and less experienced than you. So that's the fable of the cock and the jewel. Pretty simple. The hares and the frogs. Let me look that one up real quick. The hares and the frogs. The fable of the hares and the frogs. Oh, this is sort of a depressing one, isn't it? The hares and the frogs. I remember this one. The hares and the frogs is like, well, let's read it real quick. We've got some time. Anybody like to read this one? The hares and the frogs. Let's see. I've got people popping up on my screen here. Well, we'll do the fly and the spider too. We've got plenty of time. Let's do the hare and the frogs. Let's have somebody read here. Let me find somebody who's willing to read. Go back to the top. Whoa, don't unmute yourself. Calm down. Xavier, you want to go ahead and try to read it? Let me open up your I'll open up your microphone here. Xavier Ozevec. Let me find you. Where are you at? There you are. Go ahead, see if you can unmute yourself, and then you can read this fable for us. The hares and the frogs.
The hares once took serious counsel among themselves whether death itself would not be preferable against their miserable condition. What a sad state is ours, they said, never to eat in comfort, to sleep ever in fear, to be startled by a shadow, and to fly with beating heart at the rustle of the leaves. Better death by far. And off they went accordingly down to drown themselves in a neighboring lake. Some scores of frogs were enjoying the moonlight on the bank, scared at the approach of the hares, jumped in the water. The splash awoke the fresh fears of the breasts of the timid hares, and they came to a full stop in their flight. One wise old fellow among them cried, "Hold, brothers, see, weak and fearful we are. Beings exist that are more weak and fearful still. Why then should we seek die? Let us rather make the best of our lot, such as it is."
Very good. Thank you, Xavier. Okay, so we've got this fable of the hares and the frogs, and pretty dark, pretty gloomy, miserable fable here, right? You've got these hares who, being unhappy with their state in life, what a sad state is ours, they say. And just to make sure, hares are rabbits, right? These hares, they're basically the prey for every other animal. Coyotes, wolves, dogs, hunters, everyone eats rabbits or hares. And so, they're upset, they're miserable about their state in life. They say, we're never able to eat in comfort. We're never able to sleep because we always have to watch out. We're startled by every shower. We fly with a beating heart at the rustling of leaves. Better is death by far. So they're unhappy with their fearful life. So they decide to drown themselves in the lake. That's their solution for their problem. And what's interesting is it shows us that when people talk about, killing themselves, look at what kind of people consider killing themselves. The kind of people who think about killing themselves are fearful, timid, weak people. So it sort of shows us what's already wrong in somebody's head who says and thinks things like that. They're unhappy with their state. They're afraid of everything. And so, they're also afraid of living. They're afraid of dealing with their trouble and accepting their lot. So they decide they're going to go drown themselves in a lake. Pretty miserable. And then they come across some frogs. The frogs were enjoying the moonlight on the bank. The rabbits came up and scared the frogs. The frogs jumped into the water. And when the rabbits saw that the frogs were afraid of the rabbits, it says, one old wise fellow among them said, "Hold, brothers, weak and fearful as we are, beings exist that are more weak and fearful still. Why then should we seek to die? Let us rather make the best of our lot. So they decide not to kill themselves because the frogs are afraid of them. So this is a pretty dark, pretty dark fable. These miserable rabbits planning their suicide, and they decide not to kill themselves because the frogs are afraid of them. So what's the fable here? Let's think about the fable. First of all, we have the rabbits. They're discontented with their lot. They're discontented with their state of life. And they decide that they would rather be dead than live in their state of life, which is foolishness. They imagine that no other animal has it worse than them. They must just be, hated by the gods, and death is better than life. It's sort of a rebellion against the creator to kill yourself and say, I'd rather not live than live this miserable life. But then they find that there are actually other people or other creatures that have maybe a worse situation than they do, and that helps them to realize that they shouldn't exaggerate their condition. They shouldn't make their situation seem worse than it is, but they should be content with their lot. It says in the last line, let us rather make the best of our lot. Let's be content, okay? So that's what the wise old rabbit says among them. Let's be content with our lot. And so they decide not to kill themselves. So that's the moral of this fable is to understand that usually we exaggerate our own sorrows. We think our situation is worse than it is. We often have hard thoughts about God because we're not reasonable, like the fable of the camel that complained, right? It complained that it wasn't made right, wasn't made good enough, wasn't cool enough, wasn't strong enough. We usually exaggerate our problems. We usually make more of a fuss about our difficulties than we really should. We're usually not reasonable when we complain about things. And if we would just look around and pay attention, we'd realize not that others are worse than us. That's really not what it's teaching, but other creatures have the same problems, right? If you think about your own life, maybe you're sad one day and you think, oh, my life is the worst. Nobody has it worse than me. And you're just dealing with normal human stuff. And if you would learn about other people, you would learn that they have the same problems. They have the same difficulties, same weaknesses, same troubles. They may be different in some ways, but we all have the same troubles. It's not just you. So what the moral of this fable is to understand that others share in the same difficulties you do, and not to make too much of your problems and imagine that you're the only one who's got any difficulties. So that's the moral. And then how to apply this to our own lives is pretty easy. Try to avoid being unreasonable and making too much of your troubles. Think about the fact that other people share in the same troubles you do. Maybe you don't see their troubles. I mean, think about it. When you take a picture of yourself, do you usually take a picture and share it when you're at your worst or at your best? When do we normally take pictures of ourselves or videos of ourselves? When we're at our worst or at our best? We do when we're at our worst, or at our best, sorry, right? And so if you look around and see pictures of other people, pictures of things, you see other people at their best. And we usually don't share pictures of ourselves when we're sick. I don't post pictures and say, hey, everybody, take a look at me. I've got the flu today. Check me out. And I look terrible and I'm sick and my hair is a mess and I didn't take a shower. We don't share those pictures. And then in our own lives, we see ourselves in those situations. We see ourselves at our worst. And so we often think that our situations are terrible and that no one else has the same experiences, but they do. They just don't talk about them and we don't see them. So it teaches us not to exaggerate our own problems, not to fuss unreasonably, but realize that most of the problems we faced are just normal human problems, and God intends for there to be a solution. Max just wrote, the more you're stressed, sad, angry, upset, you'll make bad choices and will do anything to avoid it. Very good. That's a good summary of this fable. Okay. So be careful of exaggerating your troubles. We all have troubles. We all have difficulties. We all have trials to go through. God's with us in all of those things, and he intends to help us through them. And that's sort of the challenge of the human life, learning to be patient and overcome difficulties with God's help. All right. So that's the fable of the hares and the frogs, not to make too much of our situation. I promised Grace. Xavier, you can do any assessment, any fable we go over, you can do the assessment and turn it in. That's the point of these discussions of the fables. I want to do a fable that Grace had requested. Grace, what one was it? I saw it was about a spider. Which one was it? Can you remind me? I'll see if I can find it here. The fly and the spider. Okay, 1 minute. Let me find it. The fly and the spider. Let's see if I can find the fly and the spider. I have a silkworm and a spider. Let's see, that's not the right one. A lion with a spider, and that silkworm and the spider. Let's keep going. The bee and the spider. Sorry, I'm not sure where this one is. The spider and the silkworm. I don't think that in this book it's titled The Fly and the Spider. Can you just check that? You think Grace left? All right. Well, then we won't do The Fly and the Spider. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left. Any other questions? Anything else you'd like to talk about? Any other fable you had trouble with that we can talk about quickly? Any other fable? Any other questions? No, you're ready to get back to your work. All right. So we covered a bunch today. I think we talked about 4 different fables. So while you've got those stories in mind, while you've got the morals of the fables and things like that in mind, we're going to call it a day today for this, Xavier. So we're not going to do the other one. While you've got these in mind, we went over 4 different fables. Go get those assessments done and turn them in. While you already know the answers, and that's the easiest way to get through these fables. And we'll do some more next week. I hope those are helpful. If you have any questions about them, you can always send me those questions privately, but keep working on these fables. Make sure you take the time to think through them carefully. Read all the details. Make sure you pay attention to the characters that Aesop uses and think about how to use them in your life. I'm going to tell you this and promise you this, that when you get older, these fables are going to help you. You're going to remember these fables, and you're going to be able to make decisions and solve problems in your life by the stories that we study when you're younger. All right. One announcement before we wrap up. I sent out a message yesterday that I'm actually going to offer 5 different live classes, 1 each day at the same time. And I know you can't attend all of them. I know that. So it's no big deal, but just make sure your parents see that message that went out early this morning. If you'd like to join me for those other classes, there'll be 1 class each day at 1 o'clock. So you can check that out if you're interested. But that's all for today. If you've got any more questions, I'll hang out here for a few minutes. Otherwise, you're free to go, and you can just email any questions you have during the week. All right. So thanks for coming to class. Thanks for participating. I'll see you all either on Friday or next week. God bless you all. Take care.
Mr. Michael, can we do lesson 25, please?
You want to do lesson 25 real quick? Sure.
Yes, please.
And when the group quiets down afterwards, also we can open up the mic. So that's fine. So let's take Daniel. Do you know what the name of that fable is?
Yes, it's called The Brother and the Sister.
Oh, the brother and the sister. Good. Just like Rainey and who that Huck Scott there, brother and we got a couple brothers and sisters sitting here. So this is a good one. Okay, good. So the brother and the sister. We'll read about the pretty sister, right? And the nasty brother. Yeah, that's how it always is, right? So let me find this one in my book here. 1 minute, I just have to find it, Daniel. The brother and the sister. The wolf and the sheep. That's kind of like brother and sister, but that's not the right one. The 2 springs. I have to find it. Just wait a minute. I think I probably already passed it. The 2 springs. Wolf and the sheep. There it is. Okay, the brother and the sister. Let's look at this one. A certain man had 2 children. Actually, any of you want to read it while you're still here? Anybody want to read it? Daniel, why don't you read it? You requested it. Go ahead and read it.
A certain man had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The lad was a handsome young fellow enough, but the girl was as plain as a girl can well be. The latter, provoked beyond endurance by the way in which her brother looked in the glass and made remarks of her disadvantage, went to her father and complained of it. The, the father drew his children to him very tenderly and said, "My dears, I wish you both to look in the glass every day. You, my son, that seeing your face is handsome, you may take care not to spoil it by ill temper and bad behavior. And
Oh, Daniel froze on us. Daniel, just reconnect real quick. I'll finish up. And you, and you, my daughter, that you
my
may
daughter,
be.
that you
Go
may
ahead.
be
Go ahead. Go ahead. You're back.
and you, all right, and you, my daughter, that you may be encouraged to make up for your want of beauty by the sweetness of your manners and the grace of your conversation.
Very good. Okay, so we've got the fable of the brother and the sister. Okay, so we've got a boy and a girl, and they have different strengths and weaknesses. The boy is handsome. The girl is not too pretty. She's sort of plain, it says. It means there's just nothing about her that really stands out or is attractive. But she's very sweet. She's got a very nice spirit. So even though she's not necessarily beautiful outwardly, she's got a beautiful spirit. She's beautiful inwardly. The boy, on the other hand, is handsome on the outside, but he's annoying. His spirit is difficult to get along with. He's arrogant, boasts about his appearance. And so it says they look into the glass, and that's a mirror. I hope you realize what a glass is. It means to look into a mirror. So the girl's upset because the brother looks nice and he's handsome, and he picks on her because she's not very pretty. But the father says, actually, I want you to both think about your situation. And you, my son, you can see that your face is handsome, but you can ruin your handsome appearance by your bad behavior. And so nobody's going to care. And we all know this. You can know people in your life who are handsome, or a girl who's pretty, but if they're annoying, no one really cares that they're handsome or pretty. You can actually make yourself unlikable by how you act, even if you are handsome or pretty. So he warns his son of the danger of having a bad character, because no one will care if your face is handsome if your spirit is annoying or troublesome. And then he tells his daughter that even though she's not necessarily beautiful, and notice it doesn't say that she's ugly or anything like that. It just says she's not beautiful, she's plain. He says, even though you may be plain, as long as your spirit is beautiful, you'll have no problem. And we all know people like that too. We all know people in our lives who we would never say that they're handsome or they're beautiful, but we really love and enjoy them because they're pleasant and they're sweet, they're friendly, they're generous, and so on. So you can see that we do judge people by their outward appearance. It's impossible not to. But we also judge people by their inward character. And when all is said and done, in the long run, we usually choose to be with people who are nice and pleasant and friendly, even if they don't look so great. And we really don't care too much about the so-called beautiful people if they're ill-mannered, ill-tempered with bad behavior. So it teaches us that if we are blessed with one gift or one strength, we have to be careful that we don't spoil it by another weakness, whatever that weakness may be. And we're also taught that just because we lack one strength doesn't mean we can't make up for it with another. So there's lots of ways we can apply this, because we don't have to just think about beauty. We can think about anything. Maybe, you're good at math, but you're not good at languages. So you can think about, just because you're good at math doesn't mean that you're going to succeed, because you also need to develop skill in other areas. Just because you're not good at a certain thing doesn't mean you're going to fail, because you might be able to make up for that by being good at something else. So We can think of lots of applications of how this works. I think it's pretty simple, but the moral is just to understand that weaknesses can be overcome by other strengths, to not put too much trust in outward appearances, and to not be boastful, right? So pretty simple moral, I think. And then the application, we can easily think of lots of different applications. Is that helpful, Daniel? Does that clear things up for you?
Yes.
Any other questions about that fable?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. So yeah, with that in mind, get that assessment done and turned in, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
any other questions while we're still on here? Any other questions? No? Okay, we can wrap up. So that's all. It's 2:00. I'll catch you all again next Monday or Friday if you're in the Latin class. And like I said, there's some other classes starting up, so talk to your parents if you'd like to try to attend those. They'll all be recorded, so even if you can't attend them, you can still watch. All right, and I'll try to make them helpful. So I'll catch you all next week. God bless everybody.